Theme song for the Gear Podcast. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Troy.
My name is Leon Todd, and on today's video, one of the most anticipated guests that I've been looking forward to, the one, the only, Santiago Alvarez. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking and having me here. It's my pleasure to meet you guys.
Our pleasure to have you, to be able to talk to you. So whereabouts are you coming to us from at the moment?
Well, I am living in Hong Kong, so we're talking on the same time zone, I guess.
Oh, right on.
You're in Perth.
Yeah,
right?
Perth, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a straight line.
We're just
how's that?
down there.
So 12:05 p.m.
Yeah, here is same time, probably 30 degrees more than what you have there.
Yeah, it's a little cold, but it's a bit miserable at the moment. I mean, the weather here is usually, it gets a bit hot, but never really gets that cold. But man, it's feeling it at the moment. Yesterday, Leon, how are you going up in Queens? A bit chilly by the ocean.
It was chilly. I went for a walk yesterday, and I was like, I do not wear enough because it's actually resembling the chill here. But yeah, aside from that difference, Santiago, do you want to give us a very brief rundown of what you do, and then we'll dive into all the good stuff. I've got some really hyper-specific questions that I know people who are listeners of the show will really enjoy. But if you just want to talk about kind of your background and maybe a few of the companies you've plied your trade with.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I guess I'm mostly known because of my Marshall days. So I am the ex-Marshall guy that work on the Yngwie Malmsteen, Satriani / Kerry King amps,
That's
JBM.
Awesome.
Well, Origin. Quite a few Marshalls. Initially, I started in Behringer already 23 years ago. Actually,
wow.
Started working for them in Germany. Moved to Hong Kong with Behringer. Then moved to Marshall in the UK, in England. Then back to Hong Kong again with Marshall. And 2016, I left Marshall for the first time and set up my own engineering company, which is what I'm doing now. I mean, I'm engineering. I do designs for other companies. Mostly as audio, professional audio and guitar stuff for many of the big names actually in the industry. And I joined Marshall for a while during COVID, actually in 2020. Did some stuff there, but it was a bit difficult, and things changed also in Marshall. I mean, as you know, they got acquired and all this stuff that happens there, and it was not a fit anymore. So I went back on my little lab here, and that's what I'm doing nowadays.
Awesome.
You've truly lived the rock and roll lifestyle of living all around the world and working with the big names and doing it for yourself. And I'm sure you have plenty of awesome stories to tell. But aside from that, how did you, A, get involved in guitar and music, and B, engineering? What's your background there?
Okay, the guitar is, when I was, I don't know, maybe 9-10 years old, I started liking hard rock, and heavy metal. I mean, that they came, I saw these guys playing on the TV, playing like a Flying V and Marshalls and so on. So, okay, this is what I like, So my dream was by then to have an electric guitar and a Marshall. That was a Flying V and a Marshall had to be okay.
This is a good, very, very good way to start.
Good start, yeah.
Yes, actually it's a Spanish band. It's called Barón Rojo. Okay, Red Baron. It's a very known band in Spain, and the main guitar player, he used a Flying V. Well, I play Marshalls by then, but he was playing a Flying V. Okay, so he was my guitar hero I'm talking about 82 or something like that. Okay, so that's how it started. So I wanted a guitar. Finally, my dad bought me a guitar some years later, and Marshalls were too expensive. Okay, I mean, we're talking about a lot of money, maybe a couple of my dad's month's salary or something back in maybe 3 months' salary.
Wow.
Back in the day. And my dad was also an engineer, an electric engineer, and we always been involved into DIY, fix your own stuff at home and fix everything, cars, TVs. So I kind of naturally got involved into hands-on. You start moving into the guitar community, and then you start seeing amps, and you open one and say, actually, there's not that much in here, I mean, this is just few resistors, few tubes, few valves, so you start that was my way of thinking. It's like, it's not much, I can do this, So I started copying Marshalls. I went to a shop asking for a schematic of a Marshall because I wanted to, like that. I mean, I knew the guys in the shop, obviously, so I wanted, I want to build a Marshall. Do you have the schematics? Because, I mean, no internet, no books, no anything. Okay, it's a different.
And I guess to contextualize as well, you being from Spain, what was it, the mid-70s when Franco died? So Spain was quite, I guess, isolated economically and a little there was a.
I mean, I remember Franco. I was 5, I think. I mean, I was born in 73. I think he died in 78, 77, 78, I think it was. And I think I remember it because I was super annoyed because on TV there were no commercials. Okay, so it was just Franco. But I don't have any life experience of living in the Franco era. Okay, actually, Spain wasn't doing that bad. For some things, was actually quite. I wouldn't say a superpower, but they were up there with the big ones, like in nuclear energy and so on.
Yeah. So like sort of that engineering and technology. Yeah. I guess there were, to contextualize it, it was in Western Europe, but parts of it were fully integrated and parts of it weren't as well.
Yeah, and obviously the life level, the way a German citizen was living back in the day was much higher than a Spanish guy. So my dad could buy a local-made crappy Spanish car. The Germans were driving BMWs, So obviously for a Spanish guy to buy a Marshall, it was really expensive. I mean, you can buy it. It's not that we're isolated that you couldn't find a Marshall. But it was just super prohibitive.
It's one of those, why pay that much when, if I kind of dig around a little bit and I'm a little bit resourceful and creative, I can probably do the same thing.
I mean, you may know somebody who had a Marshall, okay? That was like, hey, I know somebody who actually has a Marshall.
That's exactly like us here. We were talking the other day about like Mesa Boogies over here about 20 years ago was so expensive. And I mean, and it's like PRS as well. Like if you like Leon, when I met you, Leon had a PRS and I just couldn't believe it because thinking, oh my God, how did this guy afford this guitar? I mean, it's
like that. I know a guy who has a PRS. Like, wow. Yes. So it was like that. And again, it's no internet. It's no real. So if you wanted to learn, you have to buy books, but they were not books in Spanish. So I had friends that were maybe studying in the US, bringing me books from their libraries. Okay, so I was kind of maybe photocopying the parts that I was interested. It was just general electronics. It was not even guitar specific electronics. So that's how I started. I mean, I was like 15 or so when I built my first pedal, and 17 or 16 when I built my first Marshall. Okay. So that's how it started, and honestly, I wanted to be a pilot. Okay, that was my.
Okay, right.
Yeah, I want to be a pilot, but again, because of the same situation in a country like Spain. Either your father is rich and they can pay you to go to Adelaide to be trained, okay, or you have to go to the military, to the army. And I remember when I applied. I mean, I didn't apply. I was about to apply, but there were 17 openings. And there were more than 2,000 people in the queue.
Oh, okay.
So, and straight away, glasses out. I mean, because it's not because you cannot be a pilot with glasses, but because there are so many people that don't have glasses that the first cut is like, okay, so problem with sight, gone. So say, okay, I do engineering. Okay, I cannot be a pilot, I will be an engineer. And I wanted to be an electronics engineer. That's because the guitar stuff. Even I like mechanics a lot. I like cranes a lot. I like heavy machinery. That's my second passion again. And so I did engineering, industrial engineering on the electronic side. But again, it's because you have to do something. You have to have a degree or something. I don't want to do something else. So okay, like electronics. And in parallel, I was doing my own guitar stuff. I was working with local bands, fixing amps, fixing guitars, getting my hands dirty into the music instrument business, right? And at some point, again, when I was in university starting the PhD, I was bored of it. And I said, I don't want to do this. I want to work in what I like, which is I want to design professional electronics So I sent a few CVs here and there, and Behringer called me straight away. I mean, probably was the right moment, the right door, like a junior engineer. I mean, no experience professionally, with a degree in Europe, so it's very easy to hire between countries, which actually knows what a guitar output impedance is, or how a bass amp works. So I could I fit it. I was cheap because I was a junior. They were starting the guitar amplifier part of the business.
This was late 90s or early 2000s?
It was 2000.
2000, yeah, okay.
Yeah, year 2000. And I moved to Germany. I got my Golf and I drove from Spain to Germany, and like that.
I mean, Behringer was a very different company back then. So I got into I'm a recording engineer and just general sound engineer. So I'll ask you about some of your other work later on. But in terms of my knowledge of Behringer, like from sort of early 2000s to what they are now as a company, like the reputation has changed a lot over that time. In terms of the guitar stuff, that sort of early Behringer period, so it was, the V amp. Was there anything else that they were doing guitar related, or were they just starting to break into that area?
They had a range of guitar and bass combos, actually. They had the very first guitar amp, I think, was called the Blue Devil, which was it was blue. It was some crossover between a Hiss and Kettner and some Fender stuff.
Okay.
And they had some bass amps, which again was a crossover between some Fender and some others, because that's actually how Behringer was back in the day. It started as a company that kind of took the best of this and that. So, okay, the best compressor is from this brand, the best noise gate is from that brand, the best EQ is from this. So you put it together and you make like the ideal best audio rack, whatever, for an affordable price. So that was translated in a way to the guitar business that they were starting. So it was all analog amps, apart from the V amp. Okay, the V amp was kind of in parallel, done by the digital team, and I was hired into the musical instrument division, or whatever it was called back in the day. And I was mostly involved at the beginning with the bass amps. That was my very first, this is your job. Okay, you are going to work on the bass amps. And for whatever reason, Uli Behringer liked me. And I was working in Germany, and he asked me to come. He was living in Hong Kong here. And he asked me, hey, why don't you come with me and work from Hong Kong? They were having a small office in Hong Kong, opening a factory in China, and so on.
Very surprised thinking about now what their was the city, the Behringer city.
That was actually, I didn't see the Behringer city. That was like 2006 or 2007.
Right. It's funny to think back. 23 years ago to just a small office in Hong Kong, and then
Well, but I think by then Behringer was maybe 40 million US company. It was not that small. They were selling a lot. They had a lot of sales, so it was relatively big in numbers. Maybe I saw all the growth. Maybe when I joined was like 20 something, and when I left was like 80 or 70 something. I remember that the goal back in the day was to reach PV. Because PV was $100 million company. Wow. Was Yamaha was there like whatever, Yamaha was like
as the saying goes, Yamaha's the only company you can buy a guitar amp and a motorbike and a fridge from.
Yes.
So that's like slightly different monolithic beast. But on the V amp, because one of my viewers sent me theirs.
Quickly go talk to Rory. Sorry for all of our listeners. We might cut this out, maybe not, but I'll be back in 2 seconds. I promise. You guys can continue.
And while Troy is tending to the young ones, I specifically want to ask you about the V amp and your involvement in that, because one of my viewers sent me one recently, and I was really, really impressed at I factory reset it, and the stock sounds were really good. I thought the stock cabs in particular sounded a lot stronger than, say, the pod, which it's obviously clearly reverse. There's parts of it where it's, I don't know if you want to call it reverse engineered or inspired by, but what was your involvement with that? And what are your recollections of sort of what was going on with that?
When I joined Behringer, they were finishing the development on that stuff. I mean, it was pretty much complete. All the sounds were there. They were doing the final kind of tuning and so on. So I actually got involved in the cabinet simulation part, because there were a couple of guitarists from outside Behringer that were invited to do like if they invite you, like, hey, come here and play this. And people were actually not really happy with the initial cabinets. And one of my first tasks in Behringer was to play guitar and listen to cabinets, and see what I think and compare to some real amps and so on.
Isn't that a funny thing though? Like with cabinets, I mean, the Fractal, like the Axe FX Ultra or whatever, people hated the cabinets in that one as well. It's like it's taken so long. Even now, some of the factory presets that comes with digital gear, I just don't understand why it sounds so bad. Like what's happening, everybody? Like, it's not, I could put a mic in front of a guitar amp and it takes 2 seconds to get a reasonable sound. So, I mean, I guess it's different ways of approaching it, but yeah, it's funny. It's the same problems that still took a decade to solve. So,
and still, I think with the IRs is something similar. I mean, sometimes you buy IRs, so you get some IRs and they're like, really? I mean, what's this? It's just boomy and harsh and whatever. Do I have to EQ this? I mean,
and when you get a pack, and it's like, I don't know, 1,000 different IRs of, like, what are you going to do with that? Like, I'm not going to sit there and listen to every single one, which is why it's so funny. Like Leon's IR, which, I mean, yeah, I don't think you very scientifically did that one IR that's on everything, and yet people love it and it sounds good and it's usable. It's just like, okay, just use the one.
It's on a Taylor Swift record, put it that way.
Yeah.
It's just become a beast all of its own. It was a bunch of test shots, so it can't be that hard, or maybe it's just dumb luck. So one thing I really did appreciate about the V-Amp is when you changed to, say, like the AC30 model, it matched it with like an AC30 cab as a starting point. It wasn't just like, you scroll through the amps and because you've got the same cab, they all kind of sound the same. It's little things like that where I feel like it's taken 20 or so years for manufacturers to come back around to like, this is a really simple quality of life thing that most guitar players will appreciate. So yeah, we'll do that again. It's is that something you've kind of experienced being in the industry long enough where you've seen these full cycles come and go?
That's one of the things that Behringer used to do. It was like try to think how to not just copy something. It's like, hey, this is missing here. Let's put it in. Like you said, let's match this and that. Or maybe I think the V-Amp had a bit more gain than the original pod.
Yeah. I mean, you get to about like 1 o'clock or something, and that's like plenty, but you've always got that extra little bit of kick. And just the way I thought the reverb on there was pretty cool, and it's got a dedicated knob, and there's bits of it which are really streamlined again, because my read of it looking back to it was, it's like, I don't think if you were, say, like a professional guitar player with a nice collection of amps, you'd be using this in a different way than if you were like, recording your amps. So why not, if you're already in a sort of different headspace, why not tailor that experience to that slightly different headspace? You could feel I feel like for me, when I play a piece of gear where you can tell that musicians have been consulted with the design, where it's like, hey, we'll actually listen to, our junior engineer who's a guitar player, and we'll value their opinion. I think that's pretty cool.
I play guitar. I try to play guitar, and I think that's one of the reasons I also got the job, because it's, if you're going to test guitar cabinets and you don't play guitar and you don't know how a guitar cabinet sounds, it's like, how do you do that? I can tell you if I like how it sounds or not, but I don't really know how a guitar cabinet sounds. So what do you look for? Like, I can tell you there's a lot of gain, but maybe it's useless gain, it's 40 and harsh or scooped or whatever. So that's something that you learn by doing this. You don't go to university to tell you how much percentage of distortion has a guitar on the bass. That's bullshit. Okay.
I think the only time that worked was it was at the 808 when the Roland 808 was designed, and that was just an engineer that was like, I think a kick sounds like this, and I think a snare sounds like that, and then all of a sudden that was a one-off. Yeah.
I mean, it may happen, but it's a bit like playing lottery, you know?
Yeah.
It's like if you throw a bunch of resistors into a circuit and it sounds good, maybe you're lucky. But I tell you, the probabilities of that happening are very, very, very low. Okay.
Yep.
Yes. And yeah, I was going to say back then in the V-amp, what I really got involved was in the V-amp 2 and the rack and the ones that came later on.
Interesting, because nearly, I want to say like 50% of the comments on that video got like so many more comments and views than I expected. I think it had like 20,000 hits in like 2 or 3 days, where normally I'd get 3 or 4. And a lot of people said I had the rack version because it had, it had some proper pro audio things. And I remember seeing Dragon Force in 2005, maybe 2006. They played a small club here, and an Australian band called Vanishing Point opened for them, and they played their set and they were really good. And I was near the front of the stage, and the guitar player, there was a backline Marshall, and he went behind the amp and pulled out a rack V amp, and I was shocked. And I sort of said to him, I was like, were you running that into the amp? He said, no, I just plug it into the PA. And it scrambled my brain. And then they opened for Iron Maiden maybe a year or two later. And so it was kind of, to me, it was really interesting. It's like, I know their secret is they're not actually using those amps. They're just plugging a V amp. Can you believe it? So yeah, if there's anything you want to share about, especially the rack version, I'd be really curious to hear.
Well, I mean, it's again, I did all the hardware on that one. There was a rack version, there was a bass version, there was a V-amp 2, which is the same guitar shape with more sounds and more memory and stuff. And we did a combo also, we call the V-Empire. And
right, I remember
which
that.
actually sounds very good, honestly. I mean, it was they sold a lot of those. It was like, hey, the V-amp is getting old. I think Line 6 maybe launched the Pod.
I'll be back in 2 seconds.
2 or the Pod Plus or the Pod Pro or whatever it was. They had a rack also, Line 6, which actually so many people recorded with them. Professional bands. I'm not.
It's such a convenient. Such a convenient form factor as well. It's like, especially if you were in a studio, it's, compared to the cost of what an average channel strip would cost or a compressor, it's like, well, why wouldn't I have this just as plug it in and blast away with it? And there you go. There's a few people again left comments where it was, there are a few bands that, they're records that I was familiar with, like Cloud Kicker and the first few Scar Symmetry albums. Apparently there's like loads of V-amp on them because, again, you want to do the solos, just plug this in. It sounds great.
A lot of the early 2000s German heavy metal, was recorded either with an Engel amp or with a pod or with both.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it. It's what you say. You see the Martian on stage, and behind it is like, hey, this little red thing hanging here.
I know the secrets now. Yeah,
because I think the Meshuggah sound, that was like a modified, or not modified, but like there's an algorithm in the pod that was like they'd gone in and like changed a bunch of stuff. Allegedly, I don't know if that's true or not, but yeah, I always wondered with that how they. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's a topic for a different time. I was going to say, like, I remember reading that and thinking, how did they like change it so much? I didn't know. You have to like reprogram a bunch of stuff. It's very confusing, but anyway.
You know what was funny with that era, when the pod came and Johnson tried to make something, the J Station, it was called.
That's right, yeah.
There was a Yamaha, the DG. It had motorized pods.
The red one,
I've got one of them, I've got one here. It's actually pretty decent. Like, it doesn't really sound like specific amps. It's more like, here's a clean sound and a crunch sound. And
I think that one is missing the the guitar player being involved in the tuning.
Yep.
It's too Japanese in a way, too square, too properly done. And when you do a guitar amp, you need to be not proper. It's like playing flamenco. You have to have the soul, right?
Right.
Yes, I think that unit probably has a perfectly, input impedance and perfect output impedance, a perfectly laid out PCB, but it's missing the soul or the that a B amp had or a pod had, And I was mentioning that was like the guitar amps, the tube amps were going to disappear by then. It was one of those like, the modelers are here.
Right.
that's the end. No more tube amps everywhere, which is happening again with this second generation, or what you want to call it, of the new like XFX and all the stuff. Like, our guitar amp's going to die tomorrow. It's like, well, they are dying.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I actually became aware of you from a thread on the Fractal forum where someone was requesting some amp that's a modified Marshall, and Cliff Chase just kind of wrote, he's like, look, we can do it. Send me the amp, I can do it, but I guarantee it's going to be a JCM 800 with a few resistors change. And he sort of offhandedly said, he's like, there's only like a few people who I personally really respect as amp designers, who really know what's up. And he mentioned Alan Phillips from Carol Ann, and I think he mentioned like John Sir, and he mentioned you. There was like 3 people where he was, and I was like, who's this guy? And as soon as I Googled it, we get on to the next thing, which I'm going to talk about, which is obviously, so you were involved in the modeling thing. How did you end up working for Marshall, which is where most people would be aware of your designs? And, there's a lot of those amps that would be in people's studios and collections and being played live at the moment.
Actually, it was very easy. I just sent the CV. I just sent a resume to them.
Done.
It was, like that. That's, okay, working for Marshall for me was, again, it's the kid's dream, okay? The flying V with the Marshall. So come on, being an engineer in the guitar, industry, working for Marshall is like that. That's like working for Ferrari, or it's like, so it was by then when Black Star guys had left, because Black Star guys were ex Marshall, okay? So they left maybe 2003 or 2002 or whatever they left, and by 2004, I think it was, Marshall put the ad, they were looking for engineers. And I was living in Manila in the Philippines. And I sent the CV. I just said, hey, I see that you guys are looking for an engineer. And I told them, actually, my introduction letter was something like, I don't need the job. I mean, I was like R&D manager in Manila, in Philippines, manager. And I told them, I don't really need the job, but it was like my child's dream to work for Marshall. So I would be very happy if I could work for Marshall. And I got the job, that as easy as that. Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's how it happened.
Like those kind of things where, how did you join this band? Oh, I just really liked the band, and I went to the show and the guitar player left, and I said, if you're ever looking for a guitar player, there's plenty of stories like that with music. So that's amazing. So how long was that process to go from, did you just kind of drop everything you were doing and move to the UK?
Pretty much. I mean, obviously, I got the job because I had experience, obviously. I'm sure if I was the junior engineer 5 years earlier than that, I would not have got the job, okay? I had all the background with Asia and Behringer and so on. So it took a few months from the first interview to getting the contract. I got the first interview, phone call, and so on. Then I visited them. They flew me to Milton Keynes, and when I took the plane back, I had the contract already. So pretty much I had to sign the contract, and of course I was living in the Philippines, and I have to work in England. So I think it took like 2 or 3 months for me, because I moved to Spain. I moved all my stuff back home in Spain. And then I moved to England. I started working in bass amps, actually. Again,
It continues.
Yes. So every time I work for a new company, they send me the bass amps because nobody else wants to do them. Okay. Yes. So I moved to England and I started working the bass amps. And they have all this new JVM project. The DSL, TSL was expensive to make, was getting a bit tired. I wouldn't say old, but they have some issues, especially with the TSL. They wanted to do it was called the QSL, actually, the quad super
really?
4-channel. Okay, so what else? You have 3-channel. What can you do more? Let's do a 4-channel. So it was the QSL, the quad super lead, and they gave me a task. Was part of the project, like let's research about switching systems and this and that. And I designed the amp.
Right.
It was like that. So
Yeah.
I did the switching system, but I did the whole amp around it. And actually, they like it. Okay, some people was actually quite impressed. They invited some guitarists and so on. Everybody was like, "Wow!" I mean, like from a DSL to a JVM, which is actually cheaper to make. It has more sounds, more features. So that's how I enter myself in the guitar tube amp, And also, I was the only engineer that played heavy metal.
Okay.
There were another two engineers. Once James, one of the other engineers, was more into like hard rock, blues stuff, and Steve Dawson designed the vintage modern. He was more into hard rock, but until Deep Purple. Okay, I mean, let's say, I was after Deep Purple. So heavy metal.
There's just more gain and more.
More gain. Yeah, exactly, more gain.
More gain, more metal. It's really interesting because, for me growing up, like one of my earliest memories of guitar is my dad had a JCM 800 full stack and like an old JTM 45 reissue. And, it was just, you just played these amps really, really loud at any time of the day. And I remember there was a local music store that literally had a fire. So they had a fire sale and he picked up a TSL. So like one of my first experiences with like playing, like we'd do these school concerts and I'd show up with a TSL and I'd never like loved it. It was one of those amps which was like, and every time I've revisited it, I just kind of go, not for me. And there's people who love that amp.
I think Kyle Bull just did a video of it. Like,
interesting.
Like, as in, this amp sucks. I think it was him. And then he's like, I pulled it out again. And maybe it's not as bad as I thought, but I've already sold it. So whatever.
It's not, it's by no means a bad amp. It's just having played the DSL, that's your hot rodded JCM 800. And then I remember it was a New Year's show one year and Troy was there and one of the backline amps, they just got delivered like a 2-channel JVM. And knowing what I knew about Marshalls at the time, I put the knobs where I put them on my DSL and it didn't sound the same. So I kind of wrote it off. And it was this year, someone who watches my YouTube channel, they were like, you keep mentioning the JVM. I've got a JVM and I've got the JS. Where are you located? He lives 5 minutes away from me. So approaching it with like a kind of fresh attitude and just realizing that it's like, this does stuff that other Marshalls don't do, and that's its real strong point. So I'm quite curious, like especially for the OD1 and OD2 channels, what did you reference when voicing those? Were there like specific amps you guys were going for? Because it's not just like the red channel on a DSL; it's got its own thing.
The JVM, I mean, we had a few references. Obviously, we had a 5150. We had a dual rectifier. We had a Wagner. I don't know which one. Maybe Ecstasy was it? And Diesel. The Diesel. Not the 4-channel. The 3-channel. The Herbert.
The Herbert.
Diesel,
Herbert.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's really, really interesting to know that. And sorry, I'm cutting you off, but yeah, was it sort of like knowing what you know from pulling amps aside? You just sort of went, okay, it's going to be this sort of thing, or was it like specifically you wanted it to sound more in the range of those kind of
my personal target, my personal goal was a 2203 with a Boss SD1 pedal, like Zach White, that's what I was playing before. That was my amp in the 90s until I got a 5150, which I like a lot. So I used to play a lot the 5150. I tried to like the DSL. I never liked it because I was like, why do I can play a PB straight to the amp and it sounds nice. Why do I need a pedal to play a Marshall when I already have a Marshall that needs a pedal? So it put me off,
Yeah, I can totally understand that. But it's so interesting because that's the classic combination for, that's the easiest mod to do to your JCM 800 is put the little yellow pedal in front of it.
Yeah.
So, and it works, it's playing that, like I said, kind of experiencing it, I guess, with a really open mind, because whatever was happening around that time, I missed the boat when it came out, so to speak. I remember seeing them being like, man, that's a cool design, but I never really got a chance to experience it until this year. And it's just like, I get it now. And I kind of get why Marshall haven't really done a new 4-channel amp, because I don't know where you would go. You know, there's like all the gain you need in the world, and it's really flexible sort of tone shaping, and it's interesting in that regard to me.
I mean, that's how it started, you know, like the old Marshall with the pedal, which is what I was familiar with. Again, there were some other guitarists and some other people that had a similar idea. We didn't want to do like a 5150 clone. I mean, we could have, or a Herbert clone. You just can copy it. I mean, so many people copy the rectifier anyway. I mean, it's nothing. But it was like, you know, let's do something a bit different. Let's approach this with just not another amp with a couple of resistors changed. So I started with a 223 with one extra tube. Let's see. I remember the experiment I was doing was, let's see how much gain can I extract from this type of circuit, you know, until it becomes unplayable or just nasty or useless for guitar. And the first JVM prototype had more gain than the current JVM. Okay. Yes, it was. I mean, I could play it if you're used to it. You know how to play it. You know, you have to use the guitar volume to make it quiet. I mean, it's like driving a fast car without ABS and without traction control and stuff. You need to know how to drive the thing, you know. And some people already were struggling with the JVM, like, hey, it has too much gain. And I was quite strong, like, hey, you know, if you play metal, you need this, okay? I don't care what you think. I mean, you have 3 channels extra, you know. You can do whatever you like, but you need the gain. I mean, I remember telling my boss by then, you don't know how to play with high gain, okay? But that doesn't mean that people don't know how to play with high gain. And kind of time put me right in a way. I mean, people complain of too much gain, but it's people actually don't need
they're
that
wrong.
gain. Yes, they're wrong, but they're
better to have it and turn it down if that's all it is. Easy peasy. It's not
or just use a different channel or a different amp. I mean, it was just. I remember. I don't know if you are aware. Nick Bowcott. Okay, he works in Sweetwater now. He was Marshall US by then, Core US Marshall or whatever, and he was always more gain. You know. And finally, you know, I gave him an amp like, hey, I don't need more gain here, you know what I mean? So he was happy. And that became like, I always say, you know, finally a Marshall that people modified to reduce the gain, okay? because before that, every single Marshall was modified to put more gain. And I mean, it has aged quite well. I mean, it was designed in 2006, launched probably in AMP 2007, something like that. So it's quite a few years, okay, for a Marshall in production without any changes.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I haven't bought an amp. I think the last amp I bought was a Boogie Mark IV. One of my viewers was selling it, and they said, hey, I know you want one of these. They hooked me up great. Playing a JVM was probably actually the first time I've been like, I need to start looking out for these. And one came up for sale. I specifically wanted the 4-channel head, and one was advertised here, and it was the combo. I was like, I don't really have room for a combo. Like they advertised it as a head or something, but it's now officially on the list of something that I feel like I need to acquire because as you said, it's like it's got a lot of gain. It's still Marshall-y. It's not a 5150 or a Bogner or something. I sort of recognize that sound on, you know, the late 2000s, early 2010s. There's some records where you sort of like go, actually, yeah, you can tell, and you see the rig rundowns where they're using JVMs, and you're like, I get it. Like it's hey man, it's like quite a feat actually if you look at a company like that, which is esteemed, to come up with something that's pretty original in its lineup. It's I got to give you kudos for that. It's like I have so much respect for actually sticking up for what you believe in there and delivering something that's aged well.
I mean, that's only something that time will tell, you know, how and I'm glad that they give the amp time, because Marshall sometimes when something doesn't really sell as much as they want it or whatever, they discontinue it very quick. You know, like
the
Vintage Modern.
Vintage Modern's a good example. A
for
good
example.
amp.
Yeah. So, but it's a player's amp. It's not a mainstream or whatever you want to call it amp, and it didn't age well because they didn't let it age, so they killed it. So that's it. Part of the Marshall history, and the JBM for one reason or the other stayed, and now it's a JBM. It's an amp by itself. It's like a JSM 800. People already know, if you give them a JBM, they already know that they have 3 modes per channel and they know how to use it. Yeah. When at the beginning was like, oh, too many knobs, too many switches. Give me a DSL, okay? So
it is funny.
It took some time. Yeah.
I stepped out at the exact wrong time because I was going to ask you. In the like early 2010s, I remember I was doing a lot more live sound, and there was quite a few JVMs coming through. And I reckon like 1 out of 4, it was the best guitar sound I've ever heard. And those other 3 times, it was just an absolute slug. I just couldn't believe someone could dial in an amp so badly. It was really funny. It was
with great power comes great responsibility with something like that, right?
I remember same venue, not the same guitar player, but the same venue, 2 different guitar players coming in with the same amp and going like, like the first time, like, oh, cool, JVM, I haven't really mixed these too much, and going like, oh boy. And then the next time coming in going like, oh no, it's another JVM. And I was like, oh yes. It's so funny that's what happened to that amp. So yeah.
I mean, that's not abnormal, I would say. But, I mean, some people, they just tend to gain to 10 and they expect to sound good. It's like, well, if this is a gain knob, it's because you can adjust it. Okay? I mean, you can actually turn it down.
It's the same as like, Mesa Boogies. I mean, Leon, we did this 10, 15 years ago where it's like you try and dial in a Mesa Boogie like you dial in a Marshall. It's going to sound awful. Like you kind of have to have that understanding of, what the tone stack's doing and how the gain structure set up and et cetera, et cetera. Like there's not necessarily even tricks. It's just like a little bit of knowledge, foundation knowledge.
That's a good point that sometimes you miss when you're an engineer or designer, is that you assume that people actually know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but you assume that people will know what you know, like like in a boogie, for example, which is it's not an easy amp to dial. No. Actually, it's not intuitive if you don't know how actually a guitar processing works inside an amp, And the Marshall on that side is more forgiving, and it was actually JBM was done in a way with all the knobs at 12, it sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, right. It again, kind of like the V amp thing. There was clearly somebody behind the process who said, "Hey, guitar players aren't engineers. They need these like there's guitar player itis." And I mean, that's actually the first thing I did with the JVM. I was like, I bet you if I put everything at noon, it'll sound pretty good because it's a Marshall, and it's probably like one of the best examples of an amp where I honestly think with the rig that I had in here, the highest any knob went was about like 6 or 7, and the lowest it went was maybe 3 or 4, and you had usable range in there. If your guitar was a little bit brighter or darker, then you could go a little more either side. But yeah, it's a really, really good point. And I feel like, especially like a Mark Series Boogie, there is a little bit of this like, oh, you got to know the secret, wink, wink. It's like the Freemasons or something. Like, you got to know the secret handshake, and then that amp sounds good. But if you don't have somebody to show you the secret handshake, you're just like baffled by why anyone would use this amp. So I also appreciate that from the design side of things. It works.
I mean, if you think of the Boogie philosophy, I mean, I love the Mark IV. Actually, I finally have a Mark V. Okay.
Oh, congrats!
Yes.
Now time for Mark 7.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, I had a Mark IV which I sold, and I also regretted selling it. And finally, I found a broken Mark V, which I fixed. So that's the way to buy cheap equipment, Mm-hmm. So it's a completely different philosophy to Marshall. I mean, Marshall will never ever put. When I was there, I will never ever put an amp in the market which pops when you change channels, which has a horrible different levels with different channels, that the effects loop doesn't work with a pedal or with a rack or whatever. So if you get a boogie, you have to go to the manual and go tell you, you have to put the gain between 2 and 3, because if you put more than 6, it doesn't work for this. There will be a different level in channels, and they give you the technical reason why, which probably you will take out. Well, actually, this is fair, and you will accept it. Okay, you will say, okay, well, these guys really know what they do, but you end with a volume at 2 and the other volume at 9 to be on the same level when you play. And Marshall, that will not go out of the door. It's like, come on, guy, how can you have a clean channel that you have to put the volume at 2 and an OD channel you have to put the volume at 9?
Well, I was going to say, because I've I own a couple of I've got a Recto and I've got a Stiletto, but I dialed them in and I sort of obviously used my ears and there was some unintuitive stuff to get them to sound okay, and then. It never ever occurred to me to read the manual. And then because I bought both amps secondhand, so I didn't have it on hand. I had to look it up, and I mean, not that that's hard, but you bring the manual up, and I remember thinking read through the suggested settings after reading through because there's like on some of those amps it says, don't put the treble too high when the gain is past a certain point because of da-da-da-da, which is all really fascinating because I love the nerdy technical side of it. But then going to the suggested settings, and there was like verbatim, the knobs that are in the manual is what I'd set the amp to. And I was like, all right, firstly, my ears are okay, clearly. Wish I'd just done that when I first got the amp. And now whenever I get a new amp, I mean, if there is a manual available, I'll try and go through it and, work out if there's any tips and tricks. But it sounds like with the Marshall, I don't know. I haven't really spent that much time with the JVM, and I certainly don't own one. Is there a comprehensive manual like that comes with the amp to dialing it in, or is it just a bit more like?
Actually, I really like Mesa Boogie handbooks. Okay, for the same reason, because they tell you the story behind what they accomplish and how, and the compromises, or why do you have to set the gain at 2 or 3.
Yep.
And the JVM, actually, I kind of copied the Mesa Boogie style because I wrote the intro of the manual,
Right.
So it's when I kind of explain how things work and so on. But on the other hand, the amp is designed in a way that it works for people that actually don't read the manual.
Yeah.
I said, all the knobs are 12, and that it does the things you would expect from a control on the front of the amp without actually knowing what the control is doing behind.
Yeah.
Which is not happening in a Mark series. I mean, the rectifier is a bit easier, but the Mark series is a bit more. You need to understand a bit more how to, or either you copy the setting somebody gave you, or you need to understand what's happening inside.
Yeah.
The best description of Leon, just before you the best description of how to use a Mark series was when in my opinion, was when the Synergy Mark II C Plus module came out, and Steve Fryette did a video of like, here's every knob and here's what it does, and this is, and I was like, because Leon, you'd independently come to a lot of those conclusions, or maybe through a whole series of research, but then it's like, from me talking to you about how to dial in a Mark series and watching that video and then trying to do it myself, I'm like, it's actually pretty easy now that I get it.
Actually, if you think about it in a different way, you will see the Mark series not that different. Okay. Now imagine this. Imagine a Marshall. Okay. So you have your Marshall amp and you have your cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you start distorting the amp. You start distorting the preamp.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the preamp distorted. You have your EQ, and then you have your power amp on the cabinet. Okay. So the EQ is at the end. It's you shape what you hear with your ears. But before the gain control, and as you know, when you turn the gain down, it gets thin, okay? Mm-hmm. Because you have the famous treble, the how they call it, people. I mean, the bypass cap. So it gets the bright cap, the bright cap. So now imagine that you have control over the bright cap. So you put that tone control before the gain. Mm-hmm. So that's the Mesa Boogie. You have your treble, your middle, and your bass. What do you usually do with a tube screamer, for example? You just take the bass off.
Yep.
Okay, because it overwhelms the whole amp.
Yep.
So that's what you are doing on the Mesa Boogie. With the way you were sitting, you will put the treble relatively high, and you will take the bass down, and then you kind of balance with the mids probably down also, but you use those as your bright cap that is automatically being in the circuit in a Marshall. But now what happens in the Mesa Boogie that whatever comes from there, you have no control.
Yep.
It goes to the speakers and sounds like somebody with block notes. Okay. Yeah. So what Boogie knew this probably because somebody told them.
Yep.
So they put an EQ. Okay. So the EQ on the Boogie amp is your tone control on the Marshall amp, and your bright cap on the Marshall, which you have no control over it, is your EQ on the Mesa Boogie.
Yep.
Okay? So that's how you, if you don't think of the EQ as an EQ, but also of guitar pre-shaping or whatever you wanna call it, then you have a normal amp. And at the end, whatever really shapes what you hear is the speaker.
Right. Okay.
So, and if you go to the really extreme situation, you just take an IR and a distortion pedal, and you can make it sound like whatever you like, because at the end, what you see in the spectrum is the speaker IR, the speaker
that
response.
filter sort of,
and the rest is just helping you to shape how you feel it, how tight it is, or so on. But the tone itself is, you have to start from the back to the beginning. So when you get into a Mark IV or a Boogie with an EQ, just think of it like that. Take your EQ, that's your tone control, and the rest is to control your signal. Okay, your treble is not giving you more treble because you're not. I mean, it's a bit kind of, you're not linear. Okay, you're distorting. This is not a linear system anymore. This is distortion.
That's one of the best explanations I think I've heard of how Boogie works. So, from the JVM, what was the next project you worked on? Was that the JS version of that, or how did because I remember getting into guitar, right? And it was always, Marshall's marketing was basically, it's just Marshall amps, and people who play Marshall play them because they choose to. But it feels like in that sort of mid to late 2000s, they've like embraced the kind of signature artist thing a little bit more.
It was, I mean, the signature thing, they did the Slash one and the Zakk Wylde in the 90s, I think it was, where a Jubilee and a 223 with different cosmetics, pretty much. Yep. But by that time, I mean, Jim Marshall was saying, okay, the only signature in the amps will be mine. If anybody wants to play a Marshall, they have to buy it, pretty much. I mean, bluntly say, okay. But back in the mid 2000s, I think, okay, Marshall was kind of out, let's say. I mean, they didn't put any new amp in the market since the DSL I mean, they tried the 04, but it was a different thing.
Oh, yeah.
and yes. And in the high gain market, there was a lot of competition. I mean, again, everybody was there, all the Boogies, Diesel, Bogna, all the Enkel, everybody was there. So Marshall started saying, okay, maybe we need some to put us back in the market. And there were all these guitar players that they were loyal to Marshall and they never ever got anything from Marshall, I mean, maybe they get the amps, but not like a recognition or whatever. So again, was Nick Bowcott who was suggesting, hey, let's do a Slayer amp. Yeah, I mean, these guys are playing Marshall forever. I mean, they are one of the big four, big three, or whatever number you want to put for the thrash metal.
Yeah.
And we're going to go into the extreme metal, extreme by then, so let's do a Kerry King amp. For the same reason I mentioned before, because I was the one that played heavy metal. Mm-hmm. So and the JVM was almost finished. So Nick, I think, was the one who pushed more for me to be involved in the Kerry King amp,
Mm-hmm.
So hey, let's do a Kerry King amp, and that was the first amp I did after the JVM.
Awesome.
So
interestingly enough, I was Googling like a week ago, not knowing that you worked on that amp, what the difference was between that and an 800, because I wasn't really certain. Because I've seen the Kerry King come up for sale secondhand a couple of times. Is there a noise gate on it? Is that right?
Yeah.
What is like 10-band EQ?
It's okay. That's the noise gate that everybody copied. Okay. So if you buy any noise gate pedal now, that's
really?
that's my noise gate. Okay?
Oh, wow.
Yes.
The JVM JS, I know we're skipping ahead, that has the same
Yeah.
noise gate, right? It's so good.
Same. No, it has a slightly different.
Oh, okay.
Your Satriani amp has a digital control of the
Gotcha.
threshold. Okay. The dynamics of the gate and the JVM
Okay.
is controlled digital. Not for the only reason that I had a microcontroller there and I can do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
we can talk
Okay.
about-
Wait.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit more again?
Let's talk about the Kerry King noise gate.
Okay, let's go. Yeah, let's
I'm curious, like what that design is. Did you say it's a dynamic threshold?
Yes, it has that. Yes.
Okay.
So this is how it started. Okay, Kerry King got involved. I mean, Slayer was asked, "Can we do this with you?" Blah blah. Of course, they say yes. Obviously, who will say no, right? So he sent us his B rig or whatever. You know, they have one for Europe, one for US. So where the whole thing was there. Okay, his 800s with the Boss 15 band EQ or 10 band EQ. I forgot the mini rack. Okay, the Boss mini rack.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that he was using. He was using a Rocktron Hush.
Yeah.
For the noise gate and a wireless. I mean, that was and a wah-wah sometimes. Okay, so it had a wah-wah and a chorus as a pedals for, I think Seldom has some clean through a different amp, the chorus, the wah-wah sometimes, the wireless, the EQ as a booster, the noise gate, and the 800. That was what both of them were playing, both Jeff and Kerry King. So that's what they sent us. So okay, let's do the booster in a knob, not a 15 or 10 band or whatever it is EQ there. So I took the frequency response of his EQ and I put it into a control on the front, which is called Beast, I think. That's how Kerry wrote it. And then I put there a studio noise gate, actually. So this is what it was. It's an expander, actually. It's not a noise gate. But you cannot tell guys it's an expander, okay? Because people don't know what expander is. So it's an expander. So it's using the same circuit that you have in any compressor that you have in your studio, okay? DBX or whatever has the same VCAs.
Yep.
So we put it there, we put in the amp, we sent it. Kerry King was playing it live, and he said, "Hey, I love this thing. The only thing is when I play Raining Blood, you know the song?
Yeah.
Raining Blood. So at the end it's staccato, you know, ching-chung, ching-chung, ching-chung. So you could hear the tail of the gate, you know, the attack. So you hear you know, the noise, the hiss being squeezed. And so they came to me and said, "Can we make it faster?" And I can make it faster, but it will sound not natural because, I mean, maybe for this particular part of the song will work, but when you play normally, it will kind of pull you back all the time. So researching and so on, I found the people who make the circuit, this BCA, has an application for dynamic threshold, okay? Using what they call a non-linear capacitor, okay? That's the technical term. So it's something that, depending on how fast the gate is closing, the expansion ratio, so how much you attenuate the signal is modified, okay? So if you let the guitar sustain, the circuit will detect that it's a slow decay, so the noise gate will be slowly engaging. Okay,
I understand. Yeah.
If you cut the sound very quickly, the circuit will detect that the signal went down fast, so we close the gate fast. So that's what is done in the Kerry King amp, which again is something that the creator, the manufacturer of the chip tells you, but you have to do it yourself. You have to adjust it for different application. You know, it's not the same vocals or studio, you know, or drums than a guitar. So I spent quite a few time just playing Raining Blood to make sure that you couldn't, destroying Raining Blood just to make sure that you couldn't hear the noise. And actually it became I have to say, I mean, it's a really good noise gate. Okay, it really works well. You can if you know, you can trigger it to behave funny. So if in a certain way of the decay, you maybe raise the volume a little bit, or you make a bit of noise, you can make it actually oscillate.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's really funny.
Yeah. You can do that. I mean, it's not a normal thing that will happen, but it's a systems thing. When you close something very fast, it kind of bounce a little bit. Okay,
right.
Like if you drop a ball on the floor, it will bounce. Okay,
understand.
So depending on how strong you bounce the ball on a mattress, which is soft, you can make it fall softly, or you can make it. You can trigger it to bounce.
Yeah, this will be a new genre of guitar noises, is circuit bending the Marshall noise gate.
Yes, you have to try. You have to try everything when you design it. It's like, but the thing is that you can actually lower the volume and play the amp clean with the noise gate on, and you will not feel the noise gate really trying to cut your signal. You can do that, and that's. I mean, that's something for
that's really
for an expander. Yeah,
because I think when I was really into rack guitar gear, which is around like mid 2000s, 2006, I had a Hush as well, actually. But that was always the battle in my ADA MP1, which is the noisiest thing in the world. But trying to work out, maybe I'll put it in the effects loop because at least I can turn it on and off when I want to go to the clean sound, and because certainly you can't run that at all times without it just chopping the decay of your notes and having it sound awful.
Actually, I was going to say that we work with. It happened 2 times. Once Paul Gilbert and Joe Satriani. Okay,
right.
Paul Gilbert came straight away say, "I hate noise gates, just turn it off," and I didn't. He didn't notice.
Yep.
And with Joe Satriani it was the same. I mean, he wanted the noise gate. Okay, but when we did after the JVM head, we did a combo that never was released, and I make an improvement of the noise gate, and he was playing the clean channel, and I had the noise gate on purpose without telling him, just to try. I want to see how it worked for him. And again, at some point he told me, "Hey, switch the gate on," and I told him, "Sorry, it's already on." So those are the things when you kind of stretch the circuit as to the limits to see how much you can extract from it, and that noise gate worked really well.
Just to put into context for me, because what it sounds like, the auto release function on a compressor, like an SSL bus compressor or something like that, which is a VCA compressor, which I guess that evolved downwards to the DBX. Well, maybe not evolved downwards, but like certainly the DBX is all in the same relative like style of compression. So that's sort of the same thing, right?
Sort of. It's like if you are moving the attack and release knobs by yourself. Okay, I will play sustain now, so you put the release slow.
Yeah, okay.
I will play it fast, so you do that on real time.
Right.
So that's pretty much in a nutshell what's happening
awesome.
In there.
So what's the difference between the JVM gate then? Oh, sorry, the Satriani one.
The Satriani, okay, it's the same. The principle is the same. The level detector and this non-linear capacitor, again, the way that detects how fast and slow is happening is the same, but the control of the threshold, instead of being done with an analog pot, it's done digitally. It's done inside of
right.
So now you can add some thinking inside, so you can know that the signal is high or low, so you can help the gate to know if the signal is going to be fast or slow. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can kind of help this auto release thing to adjust itself.
Yep.
So that's what's happening in the
that's fascinating.
Satriani app. Yeah.
And also, this is just a really weird comment to make, but that's still, for anyone listening that hates digital stuff, which there are obviously people like that, I'm assuming this is just digital in the detector circuit, right? It's not like affecting the actual analog signal.
It's the sidechain.
Sidechain, yeah.
Technically, it's the sidechain. So the signal is all analog.
Yep.
The signal is not converted at all anywhere. It's a VCA there, but the I mean, for people that don't know, the way this works, at some point you detect your signal, so you measure how loud your signal is, and then depending on how loud your signal is, you do something to it. Okay.
Yep.
So if the signal is quiet but above a certain level, you say, hey, that's noise. Okay. So you cut it off. So that's happened digitally in the JVM. So the brain who thinks if my noise is lower or higher than the level you set as a user is done digitally.
Yep. Cool.
When in the carry clean is done with a comparator,
Yeah. Interesting. So just quickly as an aside, obviously working on these kind of amps and incorporating these circuits, there's a working for a company like Marshall, it's not just a case like you're having to put something in to manufacture on a large scale. So there's industrial designers and a bunch of other elements of this. It's not just a case of like, oh, I'll just change that resistor value and add a tube here. There's like, without having to go too deep into it, like I'm always fascinated by the stuff that needs to be designed. That's not just like, well, it sounds good. It's got to sound good to meet like regulations, right? And especially like what's that extra challenge like there? Is that just like a necessary evil of the job, or is that because to me that's like something that your friend who modifies amps locally and does some JCM 800 mods, they're not dealing with the same thing where it's like, we got to modify this, but also make it so that it's legal to sell to people.
Yeah, I'm obviously, and always, and there are different ways to see it, okay? As a junior engineer, I hated it. I mean, come on. I designed the best sounding amp in the world, I cannot sell it, okay? Because some guy in some laboratory is telling me that the EMC, the radio emissions are too high, but come on, it sounds good. You play, people like it, this guy is annoying me, it's like, but of course comes to a point when you actually, if you think about it, it's like, well, this makes sense, because now imagine if there is no regulation that prevents people to put all sort of unsafe junk out there. I mean, people will die, honestly. I mean, the house will be burned if you don't have some sort of legality or regulation like cars or whatever, So obviously that's part of the job, and that's something that you have to, again, it's not a guitar player anymore. As an engineer, you have to take into considerations from the beginning. I mean, for example, if you put a DSP into an amp, you have to know that the level of emissions they will measure to your product will be different depending on the speed of the DSP.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So if you have a 100 megahertz or a 3 gigahertz DSP, you will have different tests. Okay. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Which always makes me laugh when you see like someone, pull apart an Axifex and they're like, oh, this part costs 50 cents on Mouser, and there's this and there's this. And it's like, well, one, they're manufacturing it, so it has to meet regulations. Two, that's not the point. It's like, it's in that case, it's like the code and the understanding of, things like that. With a Marshall, it's sort of like, it's that thing of like, well, yeah, it's an electronic circuit, but it has to be voiced a particular way because of guitar players and their psychology and their expectations and the history of the company and how it is to manufacture stuff and building it to a price point as well.
That's the difficult part of finding engineers in this job. It's like there is a part of an art, which is creating the sound, okay? That you may say is like painting a picture. That's art, the way you voice the amp and so on. That's not, it's engineering, it's physics, but this is not based on physics. You don't do numbers,
Like it's based on what sounds best.
Yeah, it's an art, again. But it's a circuit, it's a product. It doesn't matter now that it's a guitar amp anymore. It's a product that is going to be sold all over the world. And that has to be legally sold all over the world, okay? It's two different things, which not always happens. Not talking about Marshall, okay? All the big companies really comply because fines can be crazy. But then it's where the engineering bit comes into the job, knowing where you have to put a filter or some sort of circuit that you have to add here or there, or the way you build the circuit to minimize the emissions, because you cannot really stop the emissions. You always play some balances, so you minimize them. So this is something that is not easy actually, and for people that are just into guitar, like I make my pedals or whatever, it's very frustrating. It's because they come to work for a big company with a big name, and they will spend quite a significant amount of time doing things that are completely non-related to any guitar. Okay?
Yeah. I can imagine that. It's sort of like the unsexy part of the job versus the, getting
that nobody tells you.
Yeah. So sorry, Troy, did you have a question?
I was going to say, just like mixing a song, it's fun to do that. But got to send the invoice. You've got to do the editing. You've got all that stuff too. It's just
it's not even that. Now it's because you have to sell the CD into whatever market, and you have to fill these papers to make sure that the CD is built with actually a plastic that if somebody chooses it doesn't die. Okay. I mean that's part of it.
Yep.
You may say I don't care, but if you want to sell your CD there, you have to comply with that. Okay?
Exactly. So from that, the JVM and then the Joe Satriani edition.
Actually, sorry. Do you want to just quickly then, just before you ask about that, this is a really silly question, but take all compliance out. Have you designed an amp or have you done something to an amp that's like, this is the greatest sound that exists in human guitar history, but it will never be heard because of uncompliance? Have there been actual moments like that, or can you just design around that with a lot of thought?
You can.
Okay.
I mean, I have to tell you, if you cannot pass compliance, you're doing something really wrong.
Okay.
I mean, they're not there to stop people from selling things.
Yeah.
And once, I mean, this is experience. Okay, I didn't say this at the beginning, but now after years dealing with that, you learn how the compliance limits are, the reason why there is this limit there. And once you know, again, how a Mesa Boogie Mark IV works, so you know how the compliance regulations work, so you know where to look at before doing some sort of circuit. So if you do something that doesn't pass compliance, it's that actually you're doing something really bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like I was reading a forum on I think it was Rig Talk. I read a thread on Rig Talk a few weeks ago. I don't remember, someone who likes all these high gain amps will probably know what I'm talking about, but there was like one of these amp builders who had this like crazy modern Marshall sounding amp, and he was designing his own amps, but he put a cup hold, like a beer holder, in the top of the head. And it's like, what are you like? It's raw. This is really funny. Yeah, I'm so rock and roll and heavy metal. Got to like place for you.
Is this safer or less safe? Because, people are going to put the beer on top of the amp anyway. But
well, yeah.
But there are some, I mean, there are many things, obviously, general public, we are not aware of, when these compliance things. But there are some issues. For example, one of the reasons that Mesa Boogie is not available now is because they are not complying with the latest regulations in Europe.
Oh, right.
So that's why it's not selling in Europe. And
I didn't know
Marshall
that.
was the same. Right. Yeah, Marshall was the same. They waited until last minute, and they sent the amps to pass compliance, and they failed, because you always fail. I mean, that's going to the MOT in your car. There's always, one indicator doesn't work, or one headlight is pointing to a Russian satellite, or whatever. I mean? So there is always something that you can adjust to pass. But they changed the regulation in Europe. The safety regulations changed several years ago, and they gave a deadline that, I think it was 2019 December, everything that is being sold in Europe must comply with the latest safety standards. Okay. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you cannot do is to touch hot parts. And hot part, depends on where in the part of the product is, maybe it's 50 degrees or 65 degrees or whatever it is. So if they put what is called an artificial finger, which is like a hand with one finger made of plastic, and you can articulate it, so they start poking all your amp with that. If anywhere that they touch is over that temperature, you fail.
Wow.
Right? And look at a Mesa Boogie on the back. You can touch the tubes. They put a grill, but you put the hand like this and you touch the tubes, right? So Europe will tell you, bye-bye.
Yeah, sorry. Right. And they still haven't fixed that in 3 years.
Well, I guess they are doing that. That's the latest I read somewhere in in the internet. They got caught. I mean, it happened in a bad timing because with the COVID and everything, we couldn't get things done. But like Marshall also were caught with some transformers, not you know. I mean, that was one of my jobs when I joined them back and recalculate, redesign transformers. We passed and done. But again, as a company, it's part of business. It's not just doing nice sounding amps. You have to be able to sell them under regulation change. So you have to be aware of all those things. So again, putting a cup holder in an amp that you see like a fun thing, the guy that wrote the safety standard,
he doesn't have the same sense of humor as you do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe it's for a reason that you are not aware of, but it just kind of happened. Like people saying, "Hey, why can't I put bias points on the back of my amp?" There's no voltage there. Well, it's true, there is no voltage there until something happens in the amp. So once you have a tube that gets shorted, the resistor that is in the bias point gets open, and suddenly you have 500 volts into your bias points. And nothing happens because it's a tiny hole on the back. But what happens that tomorrow your nephew goes with a ball pen and touches it.
Yeah.
It never happens until it happens.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Exactly.
As always. And what happens that you as a manufacturer will have a big problem.
Yeah.
Because you're not complying with the safety standards. So you have to know that you cannot put the bias point there. You have to put it somewhere else, but not there. So it's not that you cannot put a bias point, but where you put it, or how the circuit inside, all that.
It's a fascinating insight into the why with like mass-produced products, where it's like, oh, why can't they just do A, B, or C? It's like you don't think they've thought about that, and then maybe there's actually some pragmatic reasons why. So,
people keep asking about custom shop for guitar amps. It's like you cannot really do it.
Yeah,
I can modify an amp for you and nothing happens, but once I put amp in the market, I have to comply, and maybe some of the stuff I modify for you is already too much modification to pass the current approval of the amplifier, so it's illegal to sell it. So you cannot come to me and ask me to modify the power supply of your amp, because I know that I will not be complying. Well, I don't know if I will be complying, but I know that the modification is big enough to be questioned.
Right. Yes.
And you don't want to be questioned. Okay, like I change the tires on your car and you put 2 white tires and nothing happens, but sometimes police stop you and they fine you because your tires are too big.
It's not my fault, man. It was that guy at the machine shop did it. So oh man, that's that is very, very fascinating. It's so interesting to see that insight into all the other stuff that happens. But getting back to the very sexy bits of it, from there, you posted some photos on the Gear Forum not too long ago, which prompted me to finally send you an email and be like, we got to talk. So where did the Slash AFD come into the picture, and what was that process like? Because I know I watched the video with it recently where he's playing, and I really liked it because it's this thing we've been talking about where it's like sort of the guitar player side of it, and he's playing and just being Slash, and then you're actually there explaining what people are hearing in real time. It's like, oh, we did this and we made this design choice, which I mean must have been pretty daunting because Slash is kind of like universally regarded as like the coolest guitar player ever. So tell us about that process.
That happened a few years after the Kerry King. I did the MGs, the Marshall MGs. I did those, which are still being sold. Actually, it's like a JVM. Okay, I mean they are still the same ones, still being sold. And I think it was 2009 or something. The Kerry King went quite well, and they were starting to think of new artists. So it was Yngwie Malmsteen, the next one.
Right.
Oh yeah.
So it was a funny one with Yngwie. And at the same time, I don't know if it was Marshall or his last management or whoever, it was like, hey, it's coming this anniversary of the Appetite for Destruction album. Slash always wanted that missing amp.
The
and
39,
the idea came,
or 36 or whichever.
39.
Yep.
Yeah, 39 I think it was,
Oh, look, I went down a rabbit hole on that. Was it a 39? Was it a 36? Like, which one got stolen? Yeah, anyway, go on. Sorry.
So everything came together in a way. Hey, let's do a new amp, and because it's the anniversary, we can tie the anniversary with the amp. So it was introduced at NAMM 2009, I think it was. It doesn't matter. And it was, hey, we're going to make this Marshall amp, which is a tribute to the AFD with the AFD sound, and so on and so forth. And it was a bit like, yeah, but we're not going to disappear for 1 year now until next NAMM to make an amp. So there was this idea of, hey, let's invite Slash once in a while. Let's show the process. Initially it was going to be a bit more longer, maybe 2 months or something, just to keep people engaged, So we did a first video, and it was like, wow, So it became, let's do this like a live blog, on a way of the process of designing an amp, which it adds a bit of pressure, when you are designing the amp, because now you cannot be late. You cannot, you have to make it. But I took it quite well. I mean, I was into this AFD from the 90s, okay? Before internet was all this news. I don't know if you are old enough to know the old internet news, which were text. And there was these groups where you have the amp news and the, so it's the amp design, whatever, and you go there and people it's like a forum of text. So the AFD was already there, all the 36 and 39. And there were people who already described what the circuit would have been. People that were very familiar with the original amps, something like, hey, this was an 800 with this extra tube done in this way. So designing the amp was not like, oh my God, what we do, It's like, okay, I know, is this amp with this circuit done in this way? So it was a matter of adjusting it more than trying things until you get the sound
rather than have to do the whole, okay, we need to build a bunch of different amps and then modify them. It's like you've got a good starting point. It's more the sort of artistry part of voicing the amp and, really, I guess it's like a kind of rock and metal fan yourself. It must have been quite nice to,
It was, honestly, it was fun. The first interesting bit was to meet Slash, okay? I always like to meet the guys, and not only for the fanboy and a picture, actually I'm not, but to see how they play and how hard they hit. It's different. Maybe they play very soft, very hard, or what strings they use, if they put pedals, etc., etc. So that's the first thing to do with the Slash, to see how the guy plays the amps. And I was very pleasantly surprised of how bright, how knowledgeable, how technically inclined he was about what he was hearing. Okay. Because when you do an amp for an artist, usually they promise to translate the non-linear capacitor circuit into what you are actually hearing, and you have to explain to a musician what's happening inside the circuit to accomplish what he wants. So maybe he wants something, and you can explain how to get to that. So with the Slash, it was quite easy to kind of know where we are and where we were going and what he wanted. And that's pretty much what happened. We sit there. I was super happy to know that the guy was actually somebody to whom, apart that he's super, super cool and super, super nice, really down to earth, shy in a way person, you could talk guitar with him, like how you want this to sound and what we're going to do. So that's what happened. I met him in Hollywood, went back to Hong Kong, did the amp, went back to Hollywood, put the amp there, the one actually you saw in the forum, that one. And he was, you can see the video, he's super happy. And it's a funny story I'll tell in a minute about that video, about that amp. But he was super happy. He put it on tour straight away. We adjusted a little bit, but it was like Christmas Day, it's like, he made my year already on that. And it was pretty much one shot. We adjusted it a couple of things later on the AFD, and off you go. You know, that's what
awesome.
happened. It was funny because we went to this studio. I flew with the amp. I sent the amp like 2 days before I went to the studio. Flew from Hong Kong to Hollywood.
Was that when they were recording one of the albums?
It was before,
right?
I think,
because I watched a video of him in the studio, like in the recording studio.
Valentine?
Yeah, with Eric Valentine.
They were recording. Yeah, no, they were recording.
Yeah, and I watched it, and he had the amp there, and he's like, "Oh, I've just got this, and it sounds really cool." And yeah, actually, no, it was Eric Valentine said that they just got the amp, and then he said, "It sounds amazing. I had to buy one straight away." That's what it was. So.
This was before Eric Valentine was involved. It was just in between. And I sent the prototype with the camouflage one, and it sounded like crap, but really, really, really bad. It was like, and I was like, I flew all the way and it didn't sound like this. I can promise you the amp didn't sound like this, And then I remember saying, let's try this one. It was a vintage model. Let's try this one. And because he was kind of, maybe this guy doesn't understand how an amplifier sounds, Like, let's try the vintage model. He was trying to be nice and polite, okay? Like, let's go step by step. So I try the vintage model. He tried, and then he looks at me and say, it sounds even worse. And then it starts looking like, the guy in the studio, let's try in the room, He got a new cable, play into the amp, and it sounds like, hey, what's this? This sounds like a proper amp,
That sounds like the now famous PRS Carlos Santana story, where he built a guitar for Howard Leese. Howard lent it to Carlos. Carlos didn't want to give it back, so Paul built him another guitar, but put a tone knob on it, and the tone knob had been rolled down in the case. And Carlos is playing. He's like, "What's going on?" He's like. Carlos, turn the tone up. He's like, the guitar doesn't have a tone knob, And he's like, it's a different guitar. And he was like, oh, okay, yeah, you got me, kind of thing. So, yeah,
you can imagine
the fear and the oh no, what's happening? And yeah, how many times has a bad cable nearly ruined something?
You can imagine how awkward this was. And it's recorded. Okay, it never went public, but it's been recorded because it was recorded for these AFD videos and so on. And
wow.
I'm there, the designer, it sounds like shit, and everybody's looking to each other like, what's this? And then suddenly, light comes up and everybody's like, exactly, Slash took the guitar off and came and gave me a hug,
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then we're laughing at the dinner. We were laughing because it's like, I was like, Slash was saying, I was thinking about maybe these guys don't really understand what I want, so I will be step by step, maybe the preamp first and the power amp. And it's like, no, actually, you really understood what I wanted.
Yeah. I love that it was him as well. That's like, no, let's go through the signal path here and we'll change the amp first and see if that's the problem. It's like, that's awesome.
What a champion. That's awesome.
Yeah, I remember the exact phrase was like, I see some preamp thing going. That's what I hear, some preamp thing going. But it's like something is missing or something like that. That was his phrase. Okay.
That's
Oh man.
I mean, he's been through it. He's like at that point, what you'd be 25, 30 years into touring, and when or maybe saying, oh, maybe it's a bad preamp tube or something like that. He's had those experiences.
But some don't care. Eh? Some musicians couldn't care less about. They just want their Marshall there with the knobs like that and. Well, don't even look at it.
He's a funny one too, because I could, if you had said he was just, I don't know, I just rock up and plug my guitar and it sounds like me, I could easily imagine him being that sort of guitar player as well. So, which is kind of, it's interesting to sort of.
But that's why I was pleasantly surprised that it was more than just a Les Paul and a cable to a black box that sounds like he wants.
Yeah. So on that, obviously, then before that, you had worked with Yngwie, who's another, famous big guitar personality. Did you? I've spoken to Yngwie on the phone. I've interviewed him for a friend's rock magazine, and the larger than life public persona is very much like that's his public persona. Once you crack that thing, like he's a very bright guy, he's sort of like maybe doesn't let on that he's also an incredible, like very, very obviously about guitars and things like that, but also like the business side of it. He was really switched on, and he had there was like a soundbite, something where he basically, I was like, I think my question was like, how do you feel about, would you give any advice to anyone wanting to get into the music industry? And he was like, yeah, don't, because there's no money in it. Why would a record company give you $1 million? You used to be able to easily make $10 million from that. Now it's just going to go down the toilet. And I was like, someone's finally telling it like it is, So
that's the problem. That's the problem with him, is that people don't like to be told the truth. And the guy has no self-censorship, okay? So if he thinks this is shit, he will tell you, this is shit, don't do it.
Yeah.
And he's just politically incorrect, but he's not trying to be offensive. I mean, maybe 20 years ago he tried, but I don't think he tries. He's just, he doesn't care,
Yep.
So he sees something that he doesn't like and he says it. And it's up to you how you take it, And some people don't like to take it. Some people are looking for a bad way to take it because it's Yngwie, you know. And some people like the honesty, And for us, I mean, I never had to crack this shell that you mentioned because we are Marshall, okay? So he came. We were thinking to do the Yngwie Malmsteen thing. That was the next one after Kerry King. And we talked to him at NAMM show, and he was, people taking pictures and so on in front of the Marshall wall. And somebody came to me, hey, Yngwie wants to talk to you. I was like, come on, you're kidding, I mean, why will Yngwie want to talk to me? I said, no, Yngwie's here. He wants to talk to a Marshall engineer. So I went to him, and I'm here behind the security people, and say, I'm from Marshall. And then he sees me, with the Marshall logo. He moved everybody. He's like, hey, this is the guy from Marshall, the guy from Marshall. And then he grabs me, and everybody taking pictures of us, It's like, okay, hello, Yngwie. First time I met him, I was almost shaking because Yngwie is really my guitar hero.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's like, I want to play like Yngwie, okay? I mean, not anymore, but when I was,
Paul Gilbert was that for me. So yeah, you mentioned him before.
You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
He's larger than life,
Yes.
Musically, as a personality, he's one of a kind, and I guess he's one of those like Marshall loyalists,
Oh yeah, and not only Marshall. I only play Marshall. I only drive Ferraris. I only play
Fender guitars and
the tennis Dunlop or whatever it was.
Oh, okay.
What brand Fender guitars. So he's like that. So I only play Marshalls, So probably it's the most loyalist, publicly being open about saying I only play Marshalls. Okay.
Yep.
And of course he came to us and he told me I want my amp with a master volume after the power amp. That was his instruction. Okay. And so that's how I started. And I was working on that amp before the AFD happened. So that's why the AFD has the same power reduction as the Yngwie, because they were kind of done in parallel.
So is that to put kind of like a like reactive load sort of thing after it? Is that what he means by master volume, or is it a different sort of a
like a post-phase inverter?
It's even afterward. This one was this reduced the whole power of the amp. So instead of playing 100 watts amp, you just lower until 0.1.
I see. Yeah.
So, I mean, you lose some stuff. It's not the same as playing full volume, but it helps you if you can crank a 1959 at a room level.
Yep.
But it's not reactive load. It's nothing like that inside the amplifier.
Okay.
So that happened before the AFD, and then AFD came in. So we launched the AFD before, and then the Yngwie Malmsteen, I think, the year after. Or something.
I do remember when the Yngwie amp came out, actually. I remember watching the YouTube demos for it, and it sounded awesome. I remember thinking, before I got my Marshall, thinking that I really probably should just get that one instead of trying to find something vintage or whatever. But yeah.
It's like they ticked all the boxes with those, that particular... It's really interesting.
He did it very well because he actually... specifically said, I want this to look like a Marshall, I don't want anything that looks like a different Marshall on the front of the amp, because I told them, I suggested, let's put the booster on the front because, I mean, you're adjusting it all the time and it's a bit annoying. I said, no, he said, this has to look like a Marshall. A Marshall has 6 knobs and 4 inputs, 2 switches and 1 light. And my Marshall, the only different thing with the Marshall is that it says YJM instead of JTM or whatever. And that was him, and that's actually something that people really appreciated. That it was not tattoos like the Kerry King one or something. It just looked like a Marshall, you know.
Yep.
And that was him. So credits go to him for that.
It's funny that for someone who's so distinctive,
yeah,
you know, it's a really interesting blend of like big personality, big brand, I guess you like, and it's like, no, it has to, again, you want a Ferrari, if you had a signature Ferrari, you want it to just be red.
It has to be red.
Ferrari,
yeah,
you know, it's like
red, yes.
Don't change a winning formula kind of thing. I'm curious before, like, you've given us such an awesome oversight of that, having designed amps, I guess, for the general public, like the JVM, and then also worked on, I guess, the hyper specific elements of signature amps. What is a well-designed amp? What does it do? What parameters does it hit in terms of usability, functionality? Is there a magic formula, or does it kind of come down to, again, that artistry thing you were talking about, where it's like knowing what you want the circuit to do and, I guess, working within the limitations of that?
Actually, I would say, I mean, doing artist amps are easier. And I always say the same, because you only have to please one guy.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, obviously, it has to be within certain parameters that everybody can play it. Maybe this guy is really, really particular about the way he plays, and then only one every 100 guitar players will actually appreciate that, which luckily hasn't happened. But at the end, the way the amp sounds, the way the things are going on in there, you only need one approval. You only need to please one guy. I mean, obviously, you have to present something that is reasonably good, you know. But again, only this guy will tell you if it sounds good or not. But when you do a JVM, a generic amp, you don't have this. Unfortunately, you don't have this person telling you, "Hey, the amp is ready." So it can become really difficult, actually, when you have too many opinions. It's like you do a mix and you present to 30 people, and 30 people will tell you 30 different things.
Yep.
Actually, 30 people will tell you 60 different things, okay? So with an amp, it's the same until it comes to a point that someone has to say, I'm sorry, I mean, this is it, you know? I would put this in the market, I would never, ever finish anything, ever, right? So that's the difference between working with one artist or working with general, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, there is always some people that has a voice that is maybe louder than the others, you know, like, again, you may invite guitar players, you know that this guy knows how to mix an amp. So you may, I mean, if you work with a very known, well-known, famous producer, and he tells you how he records his guitar, and he puts your amp in there and it doesn't sound like he wants, you can understand that something is not right, right? So you listen to those things until at some point it says, okay, this is it. I mean, it's not that it's just good enough, but it does what it has to do. The parameters, it's like, what type of amp is it? I mean, is this a metal amp? It's tight enough? It has enough gain? It's the EQ does enough? You know, does it sound good with different speaker cabinets?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, some amps only sound good with one speaker cabinet.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this on probably every podcast, but I'm going through a speaker thing at the moment, right? And so, and I'll reiterate it again just for you, but you know, everyone else. I have a Splawn Nitro, and it sounds like great through greenbacks and unusable with vintage 30s.
Yeah,
and I only really had a vintage 30 cab. I was predominantly using that for recording for a long time, and some of the parts of the sound were cool, and then others were just like, oh, why can't I get to sound good? Tried it with greenback, it's like, great, done. But now that set me off on a path of like, well, I have all these amps and I've got now all these speakers. I have to work out what actually sounds best with what, because it's not in the manual to do so.
Yeah.
But in terms of like really any amps, are you, like when you're voicing it, presumably if it's for an artist, you would have like Yngwie. What's Yngwie using? Like presumably like a greenbacks cab? Yeah.
No. GT12s.
GT12s?
75.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so fun. I really like the way those speakers sound too, but That's really
Well,
funny.
that's an internet thing, okay? I mean, that's people put them, they bash them because everybody bashes them, but
Yeah.
there is no. I mean,
Well-
you're listening to so many records that are actually recorded with
Okay,
those speakers.
that's
Yeah.
a good point, because we should definitely talk about like what are your. I want to know your 3 biggest pieces of internet bullshit about amps, specifically Marshalls, that are just wrong. You know,
Actually, do that, and then we'll come back and talk about the speakers because I like that.
Well, actually, I have to think about that because, I mean, internet is wrong by. I always think about this little cartoon that is the wife calling you, "Hey, are you coming to sleep or what?" And the guy's all angry on the computer saying, "Hey, wait, somebody is wrong in the internet."
Yeah.
You know? I mean, it's just like.
that sums it up so well.
So they are so. I mean, the T75 G12 T75 speaker is one of those things that everybody will tell you they are crap straight away. You know, in the internet.
Yep.
And it's something that they haven't probably even listened to them. And again, that probably you have listened to your most favorite albums of ever are maybe recorded with them.
They
Right,
just
so-
well, the thing is, they always sound good with Marshalls. That's the realization I'm having. It's like, and like, no wonder if all of the Marshall cabs, basically, well, not all of them, but if that's the main speaker that's put into a Marshall cab, like, it's voiced accordingly.
It was the standard Marshall cabinet. I mean, the way it evolved from the. I mean, I read the story about it. I forgot most of it, but it was kind of an evolution of whatever other Celestion speaker with more power or something, like in the middle of the 80s or something like that, or to a bit more scooped for the metal. I mean, I really forgot. I mean, don't quote me on this, okay? And it evolved and it became the de facto Marshall standard cabinet. I mean, Marshall pretty much has 3 cabinets: the vintage 30s, the greenbacks, and the G12 T75. But if you want a Marshall cabinet, they will give you the 75s.
Yeah.
And when, for example, doing the JVM, it was the cabinet. I mean, you have to design it with this cabinet because it will be the cabinet that comes with the amp. When for example, with Yngwie, we asked, and I was expecting greenbacks. I said, no, I only use the 75s. And it's probably because it's what he gets when he goes out there, you know?
And he plays loud as well, right? So, I mean,
he plays loud.
They take a beating. I don't know how much. Well, surely the greenbacks would take a beating, but maybe slightly less reliable. I wouldn't quote me on that.
But for example, Satriani, he tested everything, even combinations of speakers in the cabinet, and he chose the 75s.
Ah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, are you gonna argue with these guys?
You can go to a forum and tell them, "Hey, you're wrong," you know.
I think like when it comes to doing chugga, that sort of thing, I think that they don't sound bad doing it, but I think the character like Vintage 30 works a little bit better with that. So with like for something that's a bit more lead guitar is like single note or like rock, I think that with the T75 works really well in my experience. I mean, the V30s also work really well for that, but yeah.
I mean, a rectifier doesn't sound good with 75s. That's for sure. A rectifier probably only sounds good with vintage 30s.
Yeah. There's a thing, I feel like with T75s, it's kind of like, despite, if I put a mic on a V30 or a T75, the T75 always feels like it's a little bit further away from me, and the vintage 30 always feels like it's a little bit more up close.
Yeah, it has some nasty stuff happening there.
But that's also an interesting thing where I feel like there's been certain projects that I've worked on trying to get guitar sounds, and this is like a realization I have now, not as I was recording it, but I was trying to get that distance and that kind of like, I feel like it's in particular like an 80s rock, 80s metal thing where it feels like where the guitars actually sit in amongst the band is like just a little bit further away. Obviously there's reverb and stuff associated with that in the mix, but I never get that same sort of distance with V30s. But if I want that like real tight, close, like V30s just sort of do that immediately. So anyway, that's just an observation. But
and the greenbacks is a bit boxier. Yeah. But in the band, if it's a rock band, it sounds perfect because you have a space for everything.
Exactly.
You know?
So what was I going to say? Oh, this might be a slightly complicated question, but I'll just ask this while I think of it. If you are voicing an amp for a particular speaker, I mean, again, this might be a really complicated question. So if it is, we'll ignore it. But like, what exactly in the guts of the amp would you kind of go towards to try and change that? Because I think in terms of a studio engineer, right, I know if I like line up a parametric EQ, I can boost and cut and those sort of things. But is it a holistic component changing in the preamp section and the tone stack, or would you just go like, I'm going to change the bits in the tone stack, or like where would you like kind of lean towards?
That's something that you learn by doing. Okay, I mean that's something actually is something that is in quotes wrong in the internet. Okay, that people try to how to say assume or schedule or okay, if you have if you want more highs, you have to change this capacitor. If you want less mids, you have to change this resistor. That's wrong. That's not how it works. Okay, that's like, hey, if you want a heavy metal song, you have to play an E, a C, and a D, you know, and then you have all the Manowar or Metallica or Iron Maiden songs, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's not how it works. So you need to know where what you look for is missing, and it may be the overall response on the amp. You know, like you want it more bassy or more trebly or whatever. That's something that you do at the end. So you do like on the power amp side, you know, like it's like you equalizing your microphone. I mean, hey, this amp has more or less highs or whatever, so you balance it at the end because that's where your stuff is missing.
Yeah.
But if you are playing and it doesn't feel right in whatever place or whatever pickup, whatever, then it's a preamp thing. It's not a power amp overall response. So then you have to know if it's a gain thing or it's maybe too much gain, because you also, again, you can cut things. You know, equalizer has a knob that can be turned down. So you can have too much distortion in the wrong place or not enough distortion in the wrong place, or the way you clip the signal, you kind of, how you say, model the signal, not model, but handle the signal along the amp, shape the signal. It may be changing a different part of the amplifier, you know. Mm-hmm. So that's something like you learn by doing.
Yeah. Like, I mean, in words, as we'd say here, this is why they pay you the big bucks to solve these problems.
I spend more time with my amp upside down on my desk than in the box, you know. So you do that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like when I teach, I teach music recording. So I always hammer on about signal flow and gain structure and having an understanding of that over anything else. Like if you can understand that concept, you can apply it to, you know, plugging in your basic PA or doing a recording session or getting your guitar signal right. So it's interesting because even just from that, like you said, like balancing the low end, that's a power amp thing, or versus other parts, it's a preamp thing. Like that is just really fascinating to me. It's almost like, okay, that's sort of now with the knowledge, the very basic knowledge I have of amp design and stuff, I can sort of like place those things together. It's just really interesting. It's I guess you just need that experience. You have to kind of put your 10,000 hours into to get into the guts and develop
the trick. The trick with a guitar amp is that it's non-linear.
Yeah.
It's distortion. So it doesn't work like a mixing desk where you can, in theory, you can add the bass or the treble anywhere you want because it's linear. It is 2 + 2 is 4, you know? So it doesn't matter where you add them. But in a guitar, it matters because at some point 2 + 2 is 3. So you lost information, and once the information is lost, it's lost.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's such a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, once the distortion comes out of the amp, there's no way for you to know what the input signal was. When in a mixing desk, because the distortion is so low, 0.00 whatever, that in theory, if you know what you did to the signal, you can know what the signal at the entrance at the input was. You know, in a guitar amp you cannot, because it's non-linear. It's distorted. Distortion is something that comes from nowhere. It's something that is added in a way that the designer hopefully wants, you know, or that thing that is unwanted, you use it for your advantage.
So aside from that, we've talked about the Behringer thing and the Marshall thing. What are you keeping yourself busy with now? You mentioned you're doing some designs for other companies, and like what?
Can you talk about it, or is that top secret?
I mean, without divulging secrets, what's keeping you excited about guitar amps and guitar music at the moment?
Well, I guess what keeps me excited about guitar amps is that I'm not doing that many guitar amps, so it doesn't become a job rather than a hobby or a passion or something.
Mhm.
So I'm doing stuff mostly music industry and pro audio industry. I mean, I've done power amps like PA power amps like 2,000, 3,000 watts.
Mhm.
I've doing PA speakers. I've done recording interfaces for people like Guitar Center and microphone preamps.
That's cool.
You know, a bit of everything. Yeah, it's a completely different. It's the same physics, but it's a different thing, a different goal. You know,
Yep.
when you're like, now the goal is to be the lowest noise, you know, for a microphone preamp and
Yep.
so on, pristine low distortion. So you have to, you know, measure stuff and so on. I've been doing some guitar pedals here and there. I mean, I've been doing guitar amps for, I don't know if you know the brand Harmonies.
Yeah.
Band Lab. Yeah, I did the Harmony amps.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Very
some
cool.
Teisco pedals.
Oh, yeah,
For
okay.
them.
Yep.
I've done soft tube, the fader. I don't know if you
really?
know okay, I did that one.
That's cool.
You know,
The little
yeah,
what's it called?
it's
the-
console one fader.
That control and for yeah.
Yeah,
They look really
console.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a bit of everything. I mean, it's not just tubes and guitars. It's a bit
Yep.
of more over. You know,
more
maybe
broad.
less more broader, less fancy in a way. I mean, for engineers, it's equally exciting. You know, to
Mhm.
program USB communication between something. So it's really nerdy on that side. Yes.
Sure.
That's
what-
awesome.
And guitar amps, I keep doing my guitar amps for myself. Hopefully one day some will see the light.
I've
Yeah.
seen, there was a clip you posted not too long ago of,
Yeah.
you know, it was like, to me, it was like an ideal, you know, here's the slightly lower gain and it sounds like AC/DC, and then you turn up the gain or you turn up your volume knob and it's just like the brown sound thing.
That's in hopefully next year. Let's see. Hopefully.
Oh, awesome. Well,
Yes.
when it does come out, we'll have to talk to you in depth again about
Sure, anytime. Yeah,
about
yeah.
it. It's
fun.
awesome. What, you know, I want to move away, but before we kind of wrap up, you know, you kind of mentioned the Flying V and Marshall thing in the early 80s. Are there any like new bands or newer stuff that you hear at the time that, you know, kind of reconnects you to that feeling that initially really made you love distorted guitar noises?
Honestly, I have to say that not really. You know, I mean, I kind of stopped listening to new music maybe in year 2000. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I put the radio, okay, the internet radio or whatever, and I listen to modern music.
You
But
got to Limp Bizkit and like nothing else.
before that. So I mean, it doesn't excite me to the point like I would buy this or whatever. It's just, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just not my,
Yep.
you know, what excites me. I mean, there are sometimes you hear modern music, which maybe is not metal, which actually is really good. You know, Foo Fighters, for example, or people like that. It's that, I mean, there is of course a lot of marketing. Even Lady Gaga, you know, that you can say it's tacky or whatever. But yeah, but if you listen to the music as a music, it's actually really well recorded with, as I like to think, with probably human musicians playing music, which is one of the reasons which actually I don't listen to new music, because I don't want to listen to a drum machine with a sequence based with an auto tune.
Sure.
You know, I appreciate people singing out of tune, you know, because I know how hard it is to sing in tune.
Yeah.
And you know how hard it is to play guitar. So when somebody plays a solo and has two wrong notes, makes you feel more human, you know? Like,
it's like that feeling of being on the edge of like, this
Yeah.
could all just be the worst thing possible.
but it's at the end it's the art thing. It's like you listen to a band playing live, like you guys play or whatever, and you play the wrong chord or whatever. That's the fun of it, you know. I mean, that's why you play in a band, because probably in the next gig you will try not to play the wrong chord there, because you are progressing as a musician, and you know.
There's definitely a lot of that. I think that's part of the fun of coming to see Ragdoll anyway. It's like, you know,
Lots of
are
wrong
they going to
notes.
play the same chord at the same time? Or is it going to be, there's only like 4 chords, but are they going to be in the right order?
Mate, you got to get back onto the EDC and just play him animal songs.
Exactly. That's you play the EDC, but at least they're in tune. It's like, But this is like modern music. First of all, compression. It annoys me. Okay? I mean, the view meter just goes there, stays there. The song ends, goes to 0. Then it's like, where are the dynamics? I mean, just put a Deep Purple record for the 70s, and when the kick drum kicks, the view meter moves up, because it's actually there's some dynamics and so on. There's people singing, there's people playing bass. Sometimes you can even hear where somebody made a mistake, in record. Maybe not a mistake, but that you fret, you press the note a bit over the fret, and So that's what
the character
actually I like from listening to music, And modern music, that's all gone. It's all sequence, all in the, people spend more time, as quantizing things, putting the beats perfectly, it's like.
It's kind of like what you said with the compliance thing, I guess. Like if you have to put something out for like mass consumption, there's that level that you like with compression where it has to be, unfortunately, at a certain volume level. And I think the last conversation Leon and I had just in terms of mixing and how like his band's developed and my work's developed, it's changed over a couple of years as you learn more things. But previously it was all about, for me, like how do you get stuff as loud as possible to be competitive. Now it's not the opposite of that, but how do I actually make things feel dynamic but also be loud? That's a completely different art.
It's almost like amps. Well, I remember in the early 2000s I was like, oh well, obviously you would buy a 4-channel amp is going to be just better than a 1-channel amp, like because then you have more stuff, when a lot of the time sometimes just like there's more ways to make it sound bad.
You get 4 bad guitar sounds instead of 1.
Exactly.
So
it's I don't know, I mean, also one evolves to a better or worse place with age. I'm sure if I was 20 years younger I would be super happy listening to modern metal, but at the moment, I mean, I listen to it, I appreciate it. It's not something that I will buy in a way. But if the band comes and plays here, I will go and see them.
Right.
That's it's not. This is just noisy crap with a rectifier and a tube screamer, just noise. No, I mean, it's not.
Has being in Hong Kong has has stuff fully opened back up again? Are you having bands and artists come through?
Yeah. It's slowly. I mean, it's fully opened. Okay.
Yeah.
That the thing comes, that the people come is a different thing, but it's no restrictions, everything. I mean, there are concerts. For example, Mr. Big are coming in a month. I think.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think Guns N' Roses maybe end of the year they were thinking. I mean, they come from time to time. It's not the best place in Asia for rock and roll, that's for sure.
Right.
I mean, that if you want that would be like Singapore or Manila, Taiwan, Korea. Japan, of course, Indonesia, But I remember talking to the Mr. Big guys a couple of years, maybe 5 years ago already, that they say we play in Hong Kong because logistically we fly there, so we are there, so it's very cheap for us to play. But if we had to go there, we wouldn't go because we don't put as many people as we put in Singapore, for example. But there is this. How you call it?
We usually get them on the way through as well, being in Australia. So
Australia sometimes it's a different tour than maybe they just go to Australia.
I mean,
for a holiday.
We're closer to where we are in Perth. Like we're closer to Asia than we are to the other side of the country. So depending on how they decide to do it, I mean, at the moment, most people are coming to just do Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and that's it. So it's on the other side of the country, and see you later, which is unfortunate, but
it is interesting though, because obviously like the Asian music market is gigantic and all those musicians love gear just as much as everybody in the US or Europe or Asia. So have you seen, I guess, from the other side of it, like the kind of marketing manufacturing side of things, where especially I guess 21st century, that market really has exploded in terms of like just people
Well,
consuming
China,
gear?
yeah, China exploded quite fast. China mainland. I mean, the thing is that Hong Kong and Singapore is like one of the two richest cities in the world. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you want to buy a limited edition PRS for $100,000, you will find it here. Okay, because people make that on a day.
Yep.
So the perspective is a bit different. But for example, rock and roll in Hong Kong is not popular. It was not popular. When I came here in 2001, people didn't know who Metallica was. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what they like, the canto pop and the
yeah.
J-pop and the K-pop and whatever pop thing, But the rock and roll was a very underground thing, I mean, from time to time you see somebody with a Guns N' Roses shirt, but they don't know what it is. They just wear it because it looks
it's fashion.
cool,
Okay?
Yeah.
You don't just go and give them a hug like, oh, finally.
Yeah, but in other places like Singapore is more international for that. And Philippines, I mean, they are musicians.
Yep.
I mean, it's one of those places where everybody can play, as like Brazil, that
Yep.
you give them whatever and they just play, and it's like, shit, I took 12 years to learn this, and this
Yep.
guy just comes here and
Just did
plays
it.
it off nowhere,
Troy, yeah, that story the other week you were talking about on the podcast about,
Well, I'm
visiting-
Indonesian. I'm half Indonesian. So the last time I went to Bali, it was just I won't tell the whole story because it's a bit boring. But yeah, just you walk into any hotel or any pub or whatever, and there's just musicians there. But my dad was from Sumatra, so he's Batak. So all of the Batak people that I've met, just by coincidence, looked like me with like long hair, band t-shirts, and dressed in like leather pants. I don't dress in leather pants, but they all had that. It was really funny, and they could all they were the best musicians I saw, and it's just they just
Indonesia
really
is also one of those. Actually, I remember one of the Slash played in Singapore. I went there, and an Indonesian band opened for them, and it was huge. I mean, there were people that were going only to see them. They didn't go to see Slash.
That's phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to see.
I think India is the other one as well. We have some friends here in Perth who are in a band called Carnival, who are a massive modern kind of prog metal band, but they went and did a massive festival headliner in India a couple of years ago. Just because they're so popular, and guitar music is so popular there as well.
I don't really know India. I mean, I'm not that connected there. But for example, in China, I know that hard rock metal is very popular in like Beijing, Shanghai, in Shenzhen, and Guangzhou. It's a lot of people playing in bands and becoming.
And these
very
are
popular.
cities that have more people living in them than the entirety of Australia. So
yes, one of those.
In perspective, where it's like, I think especially if you grow up in the Anglosphere like we did, where you just kind of think that the world revolves around you, but as the majority of the human population lives in these places, and
that applies to the marketing and the business part of the business. Okay, like usually when you may say, okay, the biggest market is the US, so you always design something thinking of the US. Okay, just because it's big and they have money, but it's just slowly changing, because I mean, how many potential Chinese customers you will have? I mean, a lot, okay? A lot. And you sell 0.0001% of the population in China, and you already sold 100,000 pieces.
Yep.
Which you don't dream to sell them in Spain, okay? So it's you have to be careful with this market perception. Like, okay, this is done for the guitar market. Okay, this is obviously our main market is US, Europe, and Japan. Australia, you do take whatever the other guys will take, because you are like Europeans living in the
pretty much,
in the down, down
under there. Like a good example would be football, soccer, right? Where it's
football,
like
football.
Yeah.
No, it's soccer. We have real football over here, so
No, football is you see.
I don't want to make the mistake calling it soccer to someone born in Spain. I've made that mistake before, but where it's like came from a very particular part of the world, but the market that picked it up and ran with it, that now dominates it, is not where it started. And I mean, for me, I kind of see that with like if you think of the history of electric guitar, it's not that old. It's only really been around for 70, 80 years, just because it's been dominated by the American market and the European market. But that's not necessarily where its future lies, where, as you said, another great example is like cricket. Started in England, it was like very much like a gentleman's game, and it's like a second religion in India now. Like everyone, it's just
the cows and the cricket.
It's like everyone there knows who Sachin Tendulkar is or Virat Kohli, and they're demigods there. And it's like if you've got places like this where it's like Slash or Yngwie or like I'm sure a lot of those people know even who like Dave Grohl is, it's like you go from being well known in one place to just being astronomical in another.
If you look to the past, it's like it was Japan before, okay? Heavy metal was huge in Japan. I mean, there were gods, people just going, everything was recorded in Japan. Hey, live in Budokan, live in Shibuya, live in Budokan, because it was huge. And these people couldn't walk in the street because they had this crazy amount of otaku, the crazy Japanese just going after them. And that kind of evolved. And in a way, I mean, it's different because it's 50 years ago. But now, in a way, it's happening in this new India, China, it's just like a new thing for them. They are starting to somehow discover the modern music, which started in UK. I mean, rock and roll is pretty much a UK thing. But it became big in the US because the market is big. So now it's shifting to
as they get to the pop stuff and
it's like it's like a very good application of that allegedly Chinese proverb of like may you live in interesting times, which it's very, very interesting for a lot of reasons. But which we don't need to get into, but like from that guitar perspective, I feel like that's going to be such a, the way, even if you look at, say, I think Fender have been quite good at this, like the last 10 years, they're probably like the first like global guitar brand where it's like, they actually kind of market to more than just like dudes with long hair who listen to rock and metal, it's like their marketing's aimed at all ages, all genders, all kind of backgrounds. And like, I feel like they've done that really well where they've pushed the bubble out a little bit, where it's like, it's whether it is more accessible or not, but it's like, it's people can look at it. A 14-year-old kid can look at it and sort of maybe identify with a little bit more than if it was just, a kind of niche thing, like for better or for worse, I guess. So it's like, it's evolved very quickly, very fast.
I mean, it's definitely different. I mean, you can buy a guitar for nothing today, a good guitar, you can just go and buy it like who buys, anything. You can buy a very good amp or interface or, plugins or whatever you want, and you can sound good. And you can just go online, and you can learn to play guitar. You can, maybe you only want to play one song, you can learn just one song, and you just go and play it. Whether in the past it was you couldn't do that, and you had to learn to play guitar before you could even dream of playing an Iron Maiden song. It's like
So
it's a different way of how open or how easy to get information is, how easy is to get the right information or how easy is to get the wrong information. Okay, which is dangerous in a way, because how can it's again the internet bullshit that we talked before. It's like, how can you tell everybody that everybody are wrong when everybody thinks they are right? It's like you cannot do that. So it's the power and the way things are nowadays make everything much easier. Fender becomes like a household brand because everybody knows Fender. So you can play heavy metal with a Fender Strat now because it's accepted. I mean, 20 years ago, it's like, what's this guy?
Only Richie Blackmore, So
only Malmsteen and Richie Blackmore. The rest you have, humbuckers. Sorry, So it becomes like that. Marshall become more of a Bluetooth speaker company. I mean, you just Google Marshall and it will appear only Bluetooth speakers. No guitar amps anymore. And people in the street, you tell them, "Hey, I work for Marshall." They will tell you, the Bluetooth speaker.
The headphones and stuff.
Yeah, the headphone company. So things are evolving in a way. Those companies obviously are established. The brand name are there. then there are new companies which are slowly, like Fractal, for example, it's new in a way in comparison, that make their own space in the business. Some people like Neural, maybe they jump in and try to get their own thing, doing things that companies probably like Fender or Marshall couldn't do, just because it's the wrong product for them. It's too ambitious or too daring or too whatever, too expensive or so. So now it's much easier to do that as a startup. It's very easy for me to do a pedal and I put it tomorrow on YouTube and I know I have 3,000 views straight away. Just because when in the past it was impossible, So how easy to get you have a YouTube channel. So it's not easy, don't get me wrong. You have to do it for years until you get the numbers add up, right?
Yeah.
But it's easy. You just need a computer and a camera. You don't need anything else. You just have to be good at your content or whatever.
Yeah. Right? It's still ridiculous to me that just a schlub like me can, with a camera, like all I need is a camera and an internet connection. And, I can talk to people like you, or I can talk to people all around the world whose work I really respect. And it doesn't feel weird. It doesn't feel like hang on, that's, it's one of the nice things about the internet, I think. When it is good, it is good at kind of breaking down some of those barriers. But as you said, when everyone thinks they're right, then how do you tell everybody that they're wrong? That's the flip side of it. So
yes, it's tricky.
So fascinating.
But again, people like you, I don't know how many followers you have, but some people have millions, okay, hundreds of thousands. You have more followers than the band. That you maybe are like, oh, I really love this musician or this band, and they have less followers than you.
Right.
It's crazy, right?
It is crazy the way that again
it's good, but it's crazy if you think about it.
Information and reach and all these kind of, I still think it's going to take a generation or two for people to actually understand what the internet really is and how we should use it. Kind of like, guitar amps. It's, there's a story of Clapton cranking up his Marshall, and it was still back when studio engineers wore like lab coats, and it's like, that's bad. And it's like, well, I'm going to do it, try and stop me. So
if it feels good, do it.
Yeah, exactly. Alrighty. So first, I just want to say a massive thank you for your time. This has been
it's been awesome.
So interesting. You've been so generous. Is there anything else before we go you wanted to shout out, or where can people support you? That's what I want to know.
So far, yes, wherever they find me online. I'm off grid at the moment. Okay.
Nice.
So no, as I always say, this is fun. It's my pleasure to talk a bit of everything, not only about being ex-Marshall, which is just already too old. So
I'm sure you crashed that one. Thank you for being gracious and indulging us with that anyway. And
no, it's we didn't talk much about that. And no, it's fun. Anytime here, yes.
We'll definitely have another chat when at any point, so we could easily talk for a long time. It's only been a casual 2.5 hours so far. So
yeah. I think knowing that you're in Hong Kong is a very good excuse for me to actually finally visit there. It's somewhere I've wanted to.
It's not a short flight, but
8 hours, 10 hours,
8 or 9 hours. We have direct flight, that's for sure. Actually, one of my, this just shameless plugin. Okay, one of my friends say, hey, if I go to Perth, I want to meet this guy, because he bought the XFX and the ADA MP1 because of you. Okay?
Send him my email then, and I can show him around. So
he's actually a pilot. Okay, and
he
if I ever have a roster going to Perth, I want to meet the guy.
Oh, that's awesome. It is just funny where it's, I think, to put a full stop on all of this, it's, growing up in Perth, I'm sure it was like growing up in Spain, you feel maybe a little bit isolated. You have to figure out how to do stuff yourself. But then as the world changes, it's like, I pinch myself sometimes that it's like, I've been stopped on the street where people are like, oh, I watched that video that you did and I bought that thing and it makes me really happy is mind-blowing, you know? So I'm sure it's a similar thing where having that thing where it's see someone playing a flying V in a Marshall and then sort of in the blink of an eye, you're there also basically making stuff that are going to give other people those experiences.
I don't think I have really realized it in a way, you know, because people, as you said, sometimes people know you. I go to the music store and maybe, hey, you know, I know you, or some is like, the other day, you know, in the middle of the street, somebody stopped the car and said, hey, Santiago from Marshall. It's like, what the F, you know? I mean, really, what the F, you know? I don't really realize it in a way, you know. My friends, if I tell you, come on, you know, I mean, you're having dinner with a Slash, okay? It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, I mean, it's yeah. You know, I mean, yes, it just happened, you know. It's just, I don't give hey, you know, I had a dinner with a Slash, okay? But like I always, you know, the business card of Billy Gibbons.
Oh yeah.
It says friend of Eric Clapton, you know. That's what his job is. Billy Gibbons, friend of Eric Clapton. I think Phil Campbell says friend of Billy Gibbons, something like that. You know, I mean, have one of them. So it's like,
that's awesome.
It's just for fun, okay. But it comes to a point that either you think you are somebody, you know, and then you are aware I am doing this, and then you just live for the past, you know. Which it doesn't pay the bills, to be honest with you. And or yes, it just happened. I mean, it was not random. I didn't win lottery. I mean, I had a career. I worked for it. I probably was in the right time at the right moment, and I have my bit of luck. I have to acknowledge that too, you know, because life is you have to work out your path, and it just happened this way. But I see it more as a life experience than a privilege or something than something to make me feel proud or so. It's like, I'm happy that I made some of those guys friends, you know. I can WhatsApp them now and say, hey, I talk about you in YouTube now. I can tell them, you know, it's fun, right? It's
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm gonna call friend of the show Chris after we speak, and I'm gonna tell him, man, you're not gonna believe who I just spoke to. It's gonna be awesome. So
that's amazing.
But anytime, you know, and even if you want something more nerdy, technical, or whatever, I'm happy to.
Believe me, we do. We must do this again. Santiago, thank you so much for your time. To everybody listening, we hope you enjoyed the chat, and we will see you on the next episode of the Gear Podcast.
See you later,
Thank
everyone.
you.